So welcome back to Cooking with Bill. We're going back to Germany again. Last time you saw me, we had made an apple strudel. This time we're going down to the Black Forest. Now, the Black Forest is known for cuckoo clocks, which you may hear ring while we're doing this video. It's known for the dense, dark trees, which gets the name for the Black Forest. And it's known for Black Forest cake. Now, Black Forest cake is basically a chocolate cake that is made with layers of creme fraiche, which are like whipped cream but not as sweet. It's got dark cherries that are sweet, that have been macerated or made happy with a kirschwasser, which is a cherry liqueur from Germany. And you layer these things up, and then you put some dark chocolate on top. I'll show you how to do that coming up. Okay, the first part of making this dark chocolate sponge cake is to get all of your ingredients. Now we're going to be using a cake flour. We use a King Arthur's cake flour. Now you can use other flours, but using a cake flour, you have a different amount of protein in the flour, gives it a different texture, makes it taste better if you actually use a cake flour for cakes. We're going to be using a dark cocoa. With that, we're also going to be using granulated sugar, but we're going to take the granulated sugar and go one step further. We're going to actually put it into a mill, and we're going to kind of grind it a little bit finer. It won't be to the level of powdered sugar. It'll have a little bit more grit to it, but it's a lot better to do it that way for this particular recipe. Now, if you don't have one, you could get by with using sugar. I guess you could also get by with using powdered sugar. But all we're doing is we're taking 2 cups of sugar for this recipe. We're putting it in a little grinder like this. And we're going to pulse it just a little bit. And at this point, we've broken down the granules to be a little more powdery than they were as just the straight domino sugar. Okay? Now again, you could buy sugar that's done this way, but I find this just as simple. If you haven't gotten one of these are really, really nice for spices. Just make sure that you clean it each time you use it so that you don't have those spices in your cake unless you're making a spice cake. Now we're going to be using 5 eggs. In this we're using about 2 1/4 cups of flour, and again that's the cake flour. We're using 3/4 cup of a dark cocoa powder. We have 10 tablespoons of butter. Okay. We're going to also have some black cherry jam that's going to be used on the layers. We're going to have some baking powder and baking soda as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and mix these together. We're going to do the dry ingredients first. So as you saw, we have 2 1/4 cups of cake flour. We've got the cocoa, we've got the baking soda, the baking powder. It's about 0.2 ounces of baking soda, 0.25 ounces of the baking powder. So about 1.5 teaspoons of each would be about right. We're going to mix all those together. Now you can sift these if you're worried about having any kind of little lumps in your stuff. A lot of people like to sift all of their baking ingredients, so you want to put all your dry ingredients together first. Now once we get those together, we're going to put the sugar and we're going to put the butter like we'd normally do and cream the butter. If you remember, we said we had 10 tablespoons of butter. Now if it's cold butter, it doesn't work well. You want to get your butter up to a room temperature for creaming. Now you can do that by setting it aside if you think ahead, and if you're like me and you don't think ahead, you can put it in your microwave at like 2% power for maybe a couple minutes. Do it for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but check it each time, see how it's doing, because you don't want it to melt. You want it to be soft. So we put our butter in here. We're going to get a paddle on our mixer. Now if you have a hand mixer, that works just fine. If you have to do it by hand yourself, have a good time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put the sugar in here, and we're going to let this cream. So again, we have that sugar that we did, and we're going to let this cream. Okay, now we're going to start adding this in an egg at a time. And we're going to let it incorporate it with that sugar and butter cream that we just made. Now, one of the things I always recommend you do is scrape down the sides of your bowl. You don't want to get any of the butter and sugar that's stuck to the side of the bowl not get incorporated with the eggs. It's good practice to do anytime you're mixing, just to give it a chance to come off of it. It may have adhered to the metal. And just give it a quick go over like that. And then we'll let it run a little bit more. Okay, so now that we've got this creamed and we've added the egg mixture, just like with any cake, we're going to add little by little the dry mixture. And again, you don't want to dump it all in at once. Give it a chance to incorporate. So as you can see, that made a very smooth batter, and that's the consistency you want to have. Now, one of the things that you want to have is you want to have cake pans to use. Now, you can use different size. I'm going to use these small ones. These are little 6-inch ones. Okay, they're Teflon coated. But you could use a 9-inch cake pan if you're making a bigger cake, a 12-inch. The real big 12-inch are really massive cakes when you start cutting them up. I'm going to make actually 2 of these because I'm making these for my wife's birthday. And we're going to take one to the restaurant. We didn't want to have a huge cake, so we're making 2 different cakes out of this. Now, one of the things when you're doing cake pans, you want to make sure that you dust the pan just a little bit with the flour that's going to be in it. Okay, so we're going to just take a little bit of this cake flour. And we're going to tap it around inside of here. Now, being that these are Teflon, I'm not really as worried about them sticking to anything, but you get a little bit of coating from the flour. Now, if you had just regular glass or the old style cake pans, you probably want to do this just to be safe. You can also put parchment paper down in the bottoms, and I may end up doing that before I pour this in. Another thing you should have is a scale. You want to be able to weigh your ingredients. Now, I've been telling you to use 2 cups, use this, use that. It's actually better to weigh, so if you have the ability to use a scale, because different flours weigh different things. So if I say use 2 cups of flour, it might weigh more than 2 cups of another flour. The same goes for any of the other ingredients, a sugar versus a granulated sugar versus a powdered sugar. They weigh different things. So to think, okay, I'm going to use 2 cups every time, it'll work, but baking is chemistry. So if you get one of these, they're not expensive, I don't know, $10, $15 from Amazon. You can zero them out, put your cup on here, it'll be 0 weight, and then you can just start adding your ingredients until it gets to the amount that it's asking for. It's also good if you're doing things with European weight versus the US weights. You can set it for that, and you don't have to worry about making a conversion in your head. Okay, so normally I would use a glass measuring cup for liquids, but it's pretty close using the metal measuring cups. So while I have this, I'm going to incorporate the milk. And I tell you what, this makes me want to just eat it right out of this bowl. This is just luscious looking. So once we've done this, it'll go into about a 350 degree oven for about 40 to 45 minutes till it's toothpick done. If you don't know what that is, you stick a toothpick in the center, you pull it out, it should be clean. If it has anything that's adhered to the toothpick, it's not done yet, leave it in a little longer. Now we're going to set these in the center rack so they get even heat. Probably about 20 minutes in, we're going to rotate them around just in case there's a hot spot in the oven. I'll show you what they look like and we'll finish this cake up when we come back. Okay, we had the cakes in for about 40 minutes thereabouts. I'm wearing oven gloves. You ought to have something when you take them out of the oven. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen up around the side. So we're just going to take a knife and just kind of go easily around the outside of it, just in case anything's stuck to the side. Now again, you floured that, you should be fine. And we did put parchment paper in the bottom. So just going around just to make sure it's loosened up. Again, you want to protect your hands. Take a plate, put it over top. We're going to flip this over. Comes out clean. Next thing we're going to do is take off the parchment paper that we put down. And then we're going to flip this over and let it cool. So there we actually have 3 full layers of cake. We're going to cut these horizontally, so we'll end up having 6 pieces of cake. So we're making 2 cakes out of this. Now you could make this as many layers as you would like, but we're just doing a 3-layered cake, and I'm going to put this together in a few minutes, but we've got to do a few things first. So I'll show you how to get the rest of this set up. Okay, you've seen that we made the cakes. Now we're going to do the whipping cream. Now this is Creme Fresh, so we're not adding sugar to this. We're actually just whipping this heavy cream. We're going to put 8 ounces in a cold bowl. So we had this bowl in the refrigerator, and we put a whisk attachment on. If you don't have one of these mixers, you can do hand whisking, but it does take a lot of work. So there's about half of that container. And we're going to let it whip until it gets to being fully whipped cream. So the next part that we're going to do is we're going to take these cakes and we're going to cut them horizontally. So we're basically making them into a thinner layer. Now you want to take it about halfway up the cake. And as you go around the cake, you want to keep your line about the same all the way through. So when you get done, we're going to put a layer of cake down. Okay. Now I put it the raised side down because I wanted to have a flat side to work with. Okay, so that's the first part of this. Now you remember I said we're going to take some cherry jam and we're going to coat the top of this with some cherry jam. So we now have the cherry jam on top, and then we're going to put on some of the cherries. Now, remember we talked about, we got the cherries, actually the type we bought was called Oregon, so Oregon dark sweet cherries. You don't want the sour cherries. You could use fresh cherries for this, but you want to make sure that you pit them, and then after you pit them, what you want to do is you want to take and put them in the kirschwasser. So about a cup of kirschwasser for a couple cans of your cherries. Now, with that being said, I did dump off a little bit of the syrup that were in the can. So if they're fresh, you don't have to worry about that. So we're going to go ahead and take our cherries and we're going to put them here on this cake. Now the one thing we learned when we watched them do this in Germany is you want to leave probably about an inch or so from the center with no cherries at all. And that is because it's going to get soggy there and you don't want your cake to fall apart in the center. So we're just putting a couple cherries across. Now if you have a bigger cake, again, add more cherries. These smell delicious. Next thing we're going to do is use a spatula, and we're going to take some of that Creme Fresh that we had, and we're going to put it down on top of these cherries. Okay, and now we're going to put our next piece on. So there's our next piece of the cake. Looks kind of delicious, doesn't it? So with this piece of cake, we're going to use a little bit more kirschwasser. Now again, we're going to take it and just drizzle it over the cake. Now if you haven't had kirschwasser before, it's kind of like a schnapps. Some people do think it's a little bit on the harsh side, just drinking it straight up. But with all this cake and all of this filling that we're putting on it, it's just going to have that nice cherry flavor. So now that we've coated that, kind of like what you would do with a rum cake, soaking a liqueur into it, we're going to take and we're going to put another layer of whipped cream. Now we're going to put our last here. A little more kirschwasser on the top. A little more whipped cream. So we've now put some of the creme fraiche on top. We're going to take a little bit more of it and we're going to work it around the sides. Now, if you have a spinning Lazy Susan, that can help you, or you can just spin the plate. Now, once you've done all of the creme fraiche on the top, we're going to take just a little bit of chocolate. Now, we're using a semi-sweet chocolate. You could use a dark chocolate. Just don't use bitter chocolate. And we're going to shave a little bit of this onto the top. And there you go, folks. Black Forest cake, made from scratch. We're going to put it in the fridge, let it cool off, and then we'll cut it and let you see what it looks like. Okay, so you've seen us make the cake. So we had chocolate layers of cake. We had kirschwasser sprinkled on it, kind of like you would do with a rum cake. We have had the black cherry jam on the first layer. We've had cherries on the first layer as well. We've had the creme fraiche, which is the unsweetened whipped cream. And on top we added some more of the cherries. So let's cut into this and see how this works. Now, I would probably recommend that you refrigerate this longer than we have, just so it sets up really nicely. But, oh, that's so good. And I had a cherry try to get away from me, so had to get it. So you can see we have a 3-layer cake. Now traditionally on American cakes we typically use like a buttercream icing, but this is not really made to be super sweet. It's to taste the chocolate and the cherries together with that kirschwasser. I'm telling you, you got to make this thing. Deb, I want you to try a bite of this.
That's good stuff.
That is a testimony that you have to have. That's good stuff. So if you've enjoyed what you've been watching with Cooking with Bill, make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube, that you click the bell so that you'll get any of these that I'm making as they come up. You can like us on Facebook. We also are on Instagram. Send us recipes of things you would like me to cook, and I'll try to put them on air as well. So, from my kitchen to yours, thanks for coming, and we'll see you back here in the kitchen.